this is how you're going to end your relationship with us, who else would want to do business with these guys after that? Not me. So it doesn't matter to me. We're moving on, and good luck to them.
From the PFL planning to absolutely destroy the UFC, to Dana White doing whatever he can to save himself and his organization, the UFC is in for some big trouble next year. There's just way too much going on, and well, let's talk about all of that. Starting with UFC's dominance being threatened by the PFL. The Professional Fighters League, or PFL, is a mixed martial arts league in the USA. It was started by Don Davis in 2017 and officially began in 2018. The league came to life after Don Davis bought and reorganized the old World Series of Fighting promotion in 2017 with the help of MMAX investment partners. Anyway, with that out of the way, on November 20th, the PFL made big news by getting Bellator, joining two major MMA leagues alongside the UFC. This surprise move changes things in the MMA world. PFL is known for its unique way of running fights in seasons and giving $1 million prizes to each of its 6 division champs. Now with Bellator in the mix, PFL says about 30% of its fighters are in the top 25 in their weight classes. PFL plans to keep Bellator's style while starting something new called the Bellator International Champions Series in 2024. This will have events in important cities showing title fights that continue Bellator's history. This team-up gives fighters more choices beyond the UFC. Bellator has helped stars like Vadim Nemkov and AJ McKee grow. PFL also grabbed attention by signing Francis Ngannou, a former UFC heavyweight champ. Even though the PFL-Bellator combo might not beat the UFC, it's a strong challenge. Fans might see fights between fighters from both leagues, but it's not clear yet if that will happen. This really could cause problems for the UFC, because it's already in trouble for not paying the fighters enough. UFC's underpaid fighters. And no, fighter pay really has become a big issue, and it really could affect the UFC in the future. MMA is the most popular sport globally, even more so than soccer because it's accessible in the United States. Currently, the UFC pays fighters more consistently than other MMA promotions. However, there's a gap between the UFC's revenue growth and fighter pay. Unlike sports with unions representing players, MMA fighters are independent contractors. Some in the industry doubt the likelihood of forming a union due to the temporary nature of fighter contracts and the individualistic nature of the sport. The ongoing lawsuit that you'll learn about if you keep watching this video might change the MMA landscape if it goes to trial in 2024. The future, according to some industry figures, points toward more visibility and recognition of fighters' value. However, opinions differ on whether a fighter's organization will emerge, but competition from other parts of the world, like the Middle East, could lead to better pay for fighters. While the UFC is still the top dog of MMA promotions, the perception that more money can be made in boxing still exists among fighters, especially those at the top. This sentiment is highlighted by instances where fighters claim to have earned more in boxing matches than in their UFC bouts. Yet, it's acknowledged that only established pay-per-view draws can cash in on high-profile boxing matches, and it's not a trend applicable to all fighters. Nonetheless, the point is, fighters haven't been happy with the current pay rate. Lawsuits against the UFC, because of which there's an antitrust lawsuit against the UFC. Let's talk about that. The UFC faces a legal battle that could redefine its future, with a lawsuit from MMA fighters alleging the organization has monopolized the industry and suppressed wages. The lawsuit, representing hundreds of fighters seeking over $1 billion, accuses the UFC of illegally controlling MMA, resulting in fighters earning far less than they would in a fair market. Since the UFC's dominance post-2006, following the collapse of Pride FC, fighter pay has gone down drastically due to the organization's strong hold on the sport. This monopoly limited fighters' options and bargaining power, forcing them to accept UFC's terms or risk being left without viable professional opportunities. At the same time, fighters' pay didn't align with the sport's booming popularity and profits, with UFC historically allocating only around 16 to 19% of its revenues to fighters. This is very different from other sports leagues that grant athletes nearly half of the revenue share. Not only that, but the UFC's dominance led to restrictive contracts that prevented fighters from exploring other MMA avenues. These contracts would trap the fighters in exclusive agreements and affect their potential earnings and career flexibility. Despite the UFC's soaring revenues, fighters faced a ton of financial challenges. A group of former UFC fighters initiated an antitrust lawsuit against the organization in 2014, now nearing trial nearly a decade later. A favorable ruling for the fighters could mean lots of trouble for the UFC financially, and it could really force a reevaluation of its business model, potentially shifting revenue distribution and granting fighters more control over their careers and earnings. Honestly, it's about time. The UFC has been getting away with paying fighters way too little for way too long. On top of this legal battle, there's another lawsuit covering fighters from mid-2017 onwards, which adds to the UFC's legal concerns. To avoid a potentially unfavorable jury trial outcome, the UFC might opt for a settlement. And guess what? In this case, a settlement would mean financial ruin for the league. However, it still might just be the best option out there. But the fact of the matter is, the lawsuit poses a big threat to the UFC's established business model. It could also trigger changes in revenue sharing, giving fighters more autonomy, but potentially impacting the organization's profitability. The UFC's contract with USADA. And as if the PFL, the lawsuit, and unhappy fighters wasn't enough, the UFC is also in trouble with the USADA, who has cut ties with the organization. The United States Anti-Doping Agency, otherwise known as the USADA, has been overseeing the UFC's anti-doping program for 8 years now. However, starting 2024, their contract with the UFC will finally end, and there are no plans to renew it either. This surprising update was shared by USADA CEO Travis Tigert after confirming Conor McGregor's return to the drug testing program. When McGregor re-entered the USADA testing pool on October 8, 2023, fans knew there was more to the story. This decision came during a time when there was doubt whether the UFC would comply with the 6-month testing requirement after USADA's departure. UFC didn't immediately respond to the allegations. Travis Tigert also took things one step further and highlighted the tension between USADA and the UFC was mostly due to Conor McGregor's situation. McGregor left the anti-doping program after an injury in 2021. Though he always hinted at a return, USADA's rules demanded 6 months of testing unless exempted. Even though there was a strong chance of contract renewal in May 2023, the UFC changed course in October, leading to the split. Tigert admitted that he was disappointed, stating that UFC athletes relied on USADA's program for a fair fight. He emphasized the importance of athletes' safety over short-term gains and mentioned the UFC's commentator criticizing USADA's approach. The anti-doping testing agency was always proud of its partnership with the UFC. Despite the tensions, they still vowed to remain transparent with testing policies until the end of the contract. However, this does make people wonder whether fighters will play by the same fair rules without USADA watching over things. Dana's future plans for UFC. Because with the USADA out of the way, Dana has got to do some type of damage control, but it took shape in the most unlikely way possible. Unlike previous years, White took to social media to reveal the title fights for UFC 297, 298, and 299. Many people think White made this strategic announcement to save face, but it's actually a sweet PR move. The first bout will feature Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis for the UFC middleweight title at UFC 297 in Toronto on January 20th, while the second will welcome Alexander Volkanovski against Ilia Topuria for the UFC featherweight title at UFC 298 in February back in the Octagon. Lastly, the third bout will see Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera for the UFC men's bantamweight title in March for UFC 299. Dana announcing all 3 title fights before the season is no coincidence either. He knows that the UFC will have a hard time trying to beat the monopoly allegations, so this is him trying to save face in the best way he can. But what do you think? Will 2024 be the toughest year for UFC ahead? Let us know what you're looking forward to in 2024 in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for updates about all things UFC.